troubleshooting operating systems. In this nugget, we'll be talking about troubleshooting the operating system. We'll talk first of all about some troubleshooting techniques. Now, a lot of these are similar to the way that you will troubleshoot hardware that we've already looked at. Nevertheless, they bear some repeating there. And then we'll also take a look at some common problems that you'll see. And these are problems that the A+ exam objectives single out as important things to be aware of. One of the other things that they will single out are certain kinds of boot problems and startup problems, so we'll need to know some of those common kinds of problems here as well. Then we'll take a look at some informational tools that will be useful in your troubleshooting scenario so you can gather more information. And then we'll also take a look at remote desktop and remote assistance, an excellent way to remotely connect to a computer for either productivity or help desk type of support. We'll also take a look at, finally, at some troubleshooting resources that will help you in getting to the bottom of certain kinds of problems. Well, much like when we troubleshoot for hardware, and we've already discussed hardware troubleshooting in our previous nugget, we also have to troubleshoot operating system issues from time to time. Now, a lot of the principles are going to be the same whether you're troubleshooting hardware or operating systems. But when it comes to our troubleshooting techniques for operating systems, first thing we have to do is to identify the problem. That normally comes in a customer service issue as a matter of questioning the user as to what they're experiencing. Now, we'll talk again towards the end of our series here on dealing with the user. This can be something that requires quite a lot of good communication skills, mostly on your part, because you have to try to derive from them what the problem is. And it also requires a great deal of patience. I repeat that. A great deal of patience, because a lot of times these people are not going to have the same vocabulary as you, and they won't even know how to describe what it is that they're seeing. So really, there's a lot of things that have to go on there in questioning the user. Sometimes if they can't seem to really explain it technically, you might just have to tell me what you did to arrive at this problem. And then you also have to make sure that it doesn't sound like you're blaming them somehow because you don't want to put them on the defensive. So this really relates to a lot more people issues at times than it does for technical issues. But regardless, once you find out what the user has been doing, you need to also identify anything that's changed. Ask them if the problem is new. Ask them if the system ever worked properly. And if it did work properly in the past, see if you can pinpoint what might have changed. Maybe they got a new sound card that they installed, and that's causing a problem. Or maybe they installed some new software, and that's causing the problem. Maybe somebody showed them a really cool utility out there on the internet, and they promised that it would make their system run faster and be more secure. And then once they installed it, everything slows down to a crawl. Very often what happens there in reality is this so-called great software that they install is really spyware or malware of some kind. And it could be using their system as a zombie, for example, or a relay to send out loads of spam email, for example. That's very often why users' computers will suddenly slow down after they install some questionable software. And that's just an example. It might not be anything as malicious as that. It could also be that this is one of those users that's kind of new to computers and they're very excited about all the different free software that they can download from the internet, all the freeware and sometimes shareware that they can get. They might have just loaded up too much junk on their system of different things they didn't need. But anyway, that also goes into analyzing the problem. Maybe you do identify that they've installed a whole slew of software there that they're not even sure what it does or what its usefulness is, but there they have it. Well, that could be one of the causes. They just have too much stuff on the system. And this goes into the troubleshooting scenario where we have to, again, question the user and see what's taken place to identify the potential causes. And once we do, we can then make an initial determination. Maybe we've been able to pinpoint it down to a specific piece of hardware that they installed, a bad driver, or maybe a piece of software that they've installed, and ever since then, the system seems to be running kind of slowly, or it crashes more frequently than it ever did. And then once that's taken place, what we can do is to go ahead and say, okay, we want to resolve this after we've made the initial determination. We think we know what the problem is. We want to then uninstall that piece of software, for example. Then we'll test it. We'll have to ask that user to reboot their computer, to do some common tasks that they normally do, and see if it's as slow as it has always been, or to see if it restarts itself like it has been. Maybe they've had a problem with that, with this automatic restarting of the system. Well, after we make our determination and we test the solution to see if it's working or not, we'll see if the problem comes back or not. And then if it doesn't come back, we evaluate and confirm that that is indeed the cause of the problem and the proper solution. And then we want to make sure that we put that down in writing. And again, especially if you're working in a shop where people bring their computers in to you, you need to document what that is. Of course, we're usually in a hurry because time is of the essence for A-plus technicians. But do at least be clear and don't abbreviate too much and use too technical a terms at times in your summary of what the problem was and what the solution was, because the user needs to know that they're getting a good value for what's going on, and if they can't understand what you put down, it won't make much sense. For corporate A-plus technicians, you'll probably want to document. You may have some kind of a requirement. Very often, larger corporations do, where if you troubleshoot, computer 975, maybe that's a tracking number of some kind for that computer, then you have to keep a log of exactly what you did on computer 975 and what updates you put on there and what kind of fixes you performed. And that's very often something that will go into a database so that if another technician later on tries to troubleshoot that same computer, then they can identify what's taken place in the past and see if that problem has recurred. Now, the CompTIA A+ exam objectives list some common problems that you need to be able to identify and potentially resolve. One of those first ones, and the most troubling ones, is auto restart. Now, one reason why this is particularly problematic is because you don't usually get an error message first. A lot of times, error messages, even though they don't always give you enough information, at least they tell you something. They'll say, this specific application failed to start, or you had a specific problem in a given memory address, or something. So you can at least identify that there was a specific location or cause to the problem. But an automatic restart, which is also often a spontaneous restart, man, that's tough to track down because it didn't give the system time or the opportunity to log anything or to generate an error message for the user to be able to read. Now, this is often going to take place before you even get to a desktop. You turn on the computer, and it looks like it's starting to start up Windows, and it gives you the splash screen, and then it just spontaneously restarts before it gets to a desktop, and it can continue in that loop indefinitely. Very often, that's going to be the result of a corrupt driver or a corrupt registry. So those are two of the common things that you'd want to take a look at there. A couple other things that it could be there is it might be heat related. So if you especially have maybe a fan over your CPU on the heatsink and that fan has become unplugged somehow, maybe you're doing some other troubleshooting in the system or upgrading something, and you accidentally, maybe your watch snagged on the cable that plugs in that heatsink to the motherboard, or the fan, then now it's not getting any cooling on that CPU, and a lot of CPUs will automatically cause the system to shut down if they get too hot, because they'll send a message to the motherboard, and then it's going to shut down. Same thing could happen with the power supply. If the power supply is getting kind of wiggy or unreliable, then if it's not able to hold up power constantly the way it should, then the motherboard also again will lose the power OK signal from the power supply, and then they'll frequently shut down or reboot. Could also be you have a problem with RAM. Maybe you have some RAM modules that are mismatched. So if you had some RAM modules that installed, and then you bought some other RAM modules that are of a different speed or a different characteristics than the first ones that are in there, that might not give you a very consistent and stable and reliable environment. So make sure you have consistent random access memory all the way across as much as possible. And then, of course, there's always the answer of it could be a virus. Just about any problem we run into, by the way, could be a virus. That's my troubleshooting technique that I always tell my customers if I'm stumped. I say, I think it could be a virus. Now, everybody's always afraid of viruses, and they want you to get rid of them. So they'll say, oh, you just keep it until it gets resolved, and they won't even care how many hours you bill. Well, to a point. So I always say, if I'm stumped, I think it might be a virus. No, that's not entirely true. But certainly there is truth to that, because viruses can also cause this kind of a problem. Now, one thing that you want to do if you're getting into this auto restart thing and it kind of circles around into a restart every time you try to turn it on, try to go to safe mode. If you can go into safe mode, then it's very likely a corrupt driver problem. Now, one thing I didn't mention about safe mode in an earlier nugget is that it doesn't load all parts of the registry either. So if you can go into safe mode, it could indicate some portion of the registry is also corrupt. And the other thing you might try is system restore. And that's SR there. I just ran out of space. But system restore. Because if you can identify this as having started at a certain point in in time, last Tuesday, then go to last Monday's system restore point and restore it. Now, that very likely, if that resolves the problem, then it was always all along some kind of a driver or operating system or software issue. But if it does not resolve the problem, then that pretty well narrows it down to a hardware problem. Otherwise, if that doesn't resolve it, try the automated system recovery or the emergency repair disk. I guess that's ERD, excuse me. That's supposed to be an R right there, but ASR or ERD, depending on the operating system. Again, remember, ERD is for Windows 2000, ASR is for XP. And once you've done that, you've basically refreshed the entire operating system. All the applications should still work, however. So if everything now works properly, then it was probably something in the core operating system that was giving you a problem. If that does not resolve the issue, then once again, probably points to a hardware problem. Now, another thing you could try is also driver rollback if you do suspect a driver. Let me go into that and show you where you can access this. If I again right-click on my computer and choose Manage, like we've done so many times in the past, then in Device Manager, if I've got a problem with, let's say it's this network card, then I can go into its properties and in Driver, I can say Rollback Driver, and that's what I would do if I had recently updated the driver and now it starts to act unpredictable or wiggy or doing this auto restart thing. Then I can roll back to the previous version of the driver. And the way it does this is, when I update my driver, it takes a copy of my old driver and it stores it on the hard drive. That way, when I click rollback driver, it just copies back that old one, and then I'll have to, very often might have to reboot the system depending on the driver. And then once that's been done, I'm back in business again. So that's just another thing to try if you have this auto restart issue. Another very frustrating kind of a message that you'll get, or problem you'll get, is a system lockup. And the problem with this, again, just like the auto restart, you don't get an error message, you don't get any clues, you don't get any breadcrumbs to track to see if you can narrow down what the problem is. It just locks up, and you really have no tools to work with. This is especially frustrating as well because the system lockup is characterized by you can't move the mouse, you try and move the mouse, it doesn't go anywhere. Nothing on the keyboard works. You have no method for inputting any information into the system, so your I/O really is pretty much ceased, except for your monitor will probably still show you whatever was on the screen when the lockup happened. And the way to confirm, by the way, that this is going on is to take a look at a couple of indicators, and I'll talk to you about those in a minute. But first of all, what causes a lockup? Well, one of those things might be heavy multitasking on a weak system. In other words, the system doesn't have really beefy hardware, doesn't have a lot of memory, doesn't have a very powerful processor. If you're doing heavy multitasking, I found that a lot of times even switching between the tasks or when you first launch the next application on a heavily tasked system, it may cause the system to lock up. So the issue there might just simply be you need to upgrade the system or not run so many applications. Or it could be a defective hardware as well. And this will be simply something where it's not the driver that's bad, it's just that the hardware has a physical problem with it. Maybe you didn't, or somebody didn't, exercise good ESD practices and they shocked one of the chips, and so then every time that device tries to use whatever intelligence is on that chip, bam, locks up the system because it can't complete whatever task it's trying to do right there. Also, you might try this to confirm that you really have a system lockup. Look at the hard drive light. Very often, if the hard drive light is not turned on, then you can confirm that you have a system that's locked up. On the other hand, if the hard drive light is on or blinking, and it indicates that the system is still trying to access the hard drive, and it's either reading or writing data or both, then probably what's happened there is you're not totally locked up. It's just the system is extremely busy, and it cannot give you priority to your I/O devices. So what you might want to do in that case is just wait a while and see if you're able to get any success in moving the mouse or using the keyboard. Another thing you could do is to press the caps lock key on the keyboard. If you're truly locked up, then your system will not accept any input from your keyboard. So if you press the caps lock key on your keyboard, then the caps lock light will not light up in the event of a true lockup. If you can press the caps lock and the light does light up, you're not in a real lockup, and again, just give it a little bit more time and see if that will resolve the issue, just giving it some time to loosen up a little bit. And then if you do get control of the mouse and/or keyboard, then see if you can close down an application or two. And also, don't forget, you can also use the Task Manager by right-clicking and choosing Task Manager or pressing Control-Alt-Escape. And then look at any applications. You might have one here that says not responding, and if it's not responding, you might just right-click on it and then choose end task or something like that. You can also go to the process and, of course, end the task, end the process tree, like we looked at in our last video. Then also you can just do this, just try a reboot. There's not much else you can do in the event of a true lockup, and you probably even if you push the power button on the computer, depending on the manufacturer, it may not do anything either. Because in a certain sense, that's also an input. A lot of systems are designed so that if you push the power button, it sends a message to the operating system telling it to do a normal, graceful shutdown. But if your system's truly locked up, it will not be able to receive that message, so you might need to hit the reset switch instead, or totally power off the computer. Another problems you'll run into are GPFs. Now, this is not actually listed on the A+ exam objectives, but we still run into them, so I think it's important to have some knowledge of them. GPF means General Protection Fault. They are also pretty frustrating, but at least they give you a little bit more information. Typically, what they'll do is when you get a GPF, it is going to give you some data as to what was going on or what was running or what caused the GPF. And then these general protection faults, what's usually the cause of them? Well, it could be bad or defective memory, or it could be poor memory management. This is usually because of poor applications, poorly written applications. You see, vendors are supposed to be able to write to certain portions of memory or to treat memory in a certain way if they follow the Microsoft software development kit. But if they decide to go renegade and do their own thing and they don't really want to follow Microsoft's rules, then they're going to get into problems because they have to follow Microsoft rules if they want to play along nicely with Windows. And if they don't, it's likely to cause general protection faults. So what you could do is try to see if there's a patch available for the general protection fault or from the vendor that will help to resolve that issue and perhaps use memory in a different way. What they're supposed to do is hand off most, if not all, of memory management to Windows in general, and then they should be okay. But we'll often see general protection faults in current versions of Windows, especially if you're using older applications. Now, this can also be problematic because a lot of times those older applications are no longer supported or the company's out of business. But if it's a mission-critical business application, you kind of just have to put up with it, unfortunately. And if all that's the case, the only thing you can do is to hopefully find a replacement for that software. So that's one of the reasons why these general protection faults, these GPFs, can be so GPF and frustrating, I'm telling you. All right, let's go ahead and take a look also at how these GPFs actually work. There's a 16-bit version of an application called BadApp 16 and a 32-bit version called BadApp 32. These are actually old Windows 95 Resource Kit utilities, which are still kind of handy, and they're designed to crash on purpose. You might be asking yourself, why does Microsoft write these programs? They already have applications that crash on purpose, apparently. But no, really, these actually do work pretty well in terms of demonstrating what they do. And what I can do with this is to just choose an action, and I want to do a general protection fault, for example. And you can't hear this because it's playing through my headset, but it's giving me the sound of a lit fuse and then an explosion right there at the end. And then guess what you get to do? You get to either close the application that had the problem or ignore. And if I click ignore, guess what? I get to save my work in a new file. So guess what happens if I click ignore? I get to close. So you really don't get any benefit out of that either way. You can either just close or you can close. One good thing you do get out of this, however, is it identifies the memory address that this took place in. So if you can contact the vendor, you can at least tell them where the memory address was, and maybe it's a known problem. And eventually, then, of course, we're going to have to close that out. Now let's also take a look at how 32-bit applications crash. And with this one, for some reason, Microsoft didn't include any sound with this one, so I'm a little disappointed. But it didn't matter to you because you couldn't hear it anyway, right? But now look what happens here. We get an hourglass here, and we don't seem to get anything going on. Then you get this not responding item. That actually can be a good thing, because at least you can identify a problematic application. Now, what I usually do when I get to this is I go to Task Manager, and we see the application that's not responding. So I'll right-click and then choose End Task, and then you get this little guy, and then you can just choose again, End Now. Now, you might just as well do that. You might just as well end it, because it's not going to give you anything that you can do anyway. Now, here we get something called error reporting. I'm going to talk to you about that again here in a little while. For right now, I'm not going to send an error report, but I'll talk to you about that again in this same nugget here shortly. And then there's the blue screen of death. And if you've been working with Windows for any more than 10 minutes, then you've probably seen a blue screen of death sometime or another. Actually, I have to give Microsoft some credit. This is substantially less frequent than it used to be under the earlier days of NT and Windows 9X. This is usually the cause of caused by some kind of a bad hardware driver. It could be a defective hardware or problematic hardware. More often, though, it's going to be a driver. Now, Microsoft has worked very well with most of their vendors and hardware manufacturers, such that we're now getting pretty sound drivers out there. So we don't see this as much as we used to. But when we do get it, we get a blue screen of death, is what we call these. Microsoft actually calls these stop screens. And I don't know if you can see this because of resolution, but it's actually kind of a parody of the blue screen of death, and it says that while you're waiting for a reboot, enjoy a Beechwood aged Budweiser. You know, it's kind of just for fun. I found this on the internet somewhere. This similar, besides the beer bottle, however, this is similar to how it's going to look, and it's going to probably identify a specific driver. It might name the driver in here, and it's probably also going to be dumping out all of the information from memory into a file on the hard drive. And the file, if you get a complete memory dump of all contents of memory, it's just going to be called memory.dmp, but the end of the file is .dmp. That's the extension for it. Now, there's not that much that we can do with that. It's really pretty much going to be used mostly by programmers to be able to analyze the kernel data in that file. But at least it's there if you're really getting into sophisticated and in-depth troubleshooting methods, and this might be something that you're going to do if you're also beta testing a driver or a specific piece of software. Now, also we'll have at times application failures. And if this happens while you're trying to install the application and it just won't let you install it, very frequently that's going to be because the user does not have the required privileges. With current versions of Windows, you have to have an administrative level of permission. So you might need to be the member of the local administrators group. And if you're not, you're just not going to have enough privileges. And the reason for that is because most applications these days write to certain locations in the system directory, and they also write to certain locations in the registry. And just generic users don't have security permissions to write to those locations. So that's why you might fail to install an application. Now, if you do run into that problem, then I'm going to go ahead and just find an application here that we could install. For instance, this thing. I don't even know what this is, but if I hold down Shift and right-click on it, then I can choose Run As, and then I could enter in a following user, and I could enter in the administrator or some other administrative account with the correct password, and it would then allow me to run that application if I was not currently logged on with administrative privileges. Now, if you do have administrative privileges, but it still will not install, very likely that's because you're running with a version of Windows that is not compatible with that application. This usually happens when you have new operating systems. For example, not too long ago, Windows Vista was released. I've tried to install some applications on Vista, and it just won't install because there's some characteristics of that operating system that the software will not recognize. And very often, what software will do during the install process is to do a version check. And it says, I'm designed for Windows XP. So if it sees the version of Windows as being anything besides the Windows XP version, it'll stop and say, hey, I'm not going to be supported on this version of Windows anyway, so I won't install on it. Then there also might be a problem simply starting the software, or when the software loads a file. And this is very often, again, going to be because of an incompatibility problem with the current version of Windows. Now then you'll also run into various boot problems, such as the message that will say invalid boot disk. This is typically what's going to happen when the post has already taken place, and then it tries to hand off the boot process to the master boot record. The master boot record, however, is not able to find a valid partition that contains the proper operating system files to get the rest of the boot process started, or if there are missing files in that boot partition. So you may get that, again, an invalid boot disk. This may also take place if you have left a floppy disk in the drive, for example, that doesn't actually have startup files on it. Now, barring that, if you do have a problem with the hard drive's partition or the startup files, try running these things. Try running the recovery console. Remember, there's a couple of things that you can run in there. One of those is the fix boot command, and the other one would be the fix mbr command. So if it somehow lost track of the mbr, master boot record that is, or if it somehow lost track of its boot process, then you can run one of those tools. And then you could also try, if that doesn't resolve the problem, automated system recovery or the emergency repair disk. Because remember, that's basically running setup, only it retains the files that were in use and configured for that particular installation during the time that these two things were created. So it gets you pretty much back up and running. Then you can also check out this message, inaccessible boot device. This is typically what's going to happen again if maybe you've got a proper MBR, but it's not able to access your system startup files like boot INI and so forth. And that would be the case if there's a problem with the driver or controller that is pointing to your system drive. And other self-explanatory messages would be stuff like operating system not found or missing NT loader. And this would simply mean that that specific file was missing or corrupt. You can usually just copy it over from a known good working machine, however, and be just fine. Then as we continue other types of startup problems, you might get a message early in the boot process that says a specific device failed to start or a service failed to start. Now, we talked about services in our last video, so we should be familiar with those. But a lot of times, if the system for some reason is unable to start a service, then it will give you that error message before you log on. And it just pops up a brief dialog box, and then it'll tell you that there was a problem with the services. If that's the case, then you can look in the event log, which I'll cover with you shortly here, and to identify certain services that might have had a problem. If the device failed to start, however, it could be that there's a problem with the driver, but more often you don't really get a message that says sound card failed to load or network driver it has a problem or something very obvious like that. Normally it's going to be more like something that occurs if there's a software piece that accompanies that device and that software piece cannot find the device it's looking for. For example, if you have printer software, maybe it's one of those scan, copy, fax kind of bits of software, and when it starts up, it searches for that printer. And if it can't find it, then it might give you an error message saying unable to find that specific device. Then you might also find the device or a program was not found in the registry. Now this very rarely, if ever, happens anymore. I can't really remember the last time I saw this happen, but when it did happen, the usual cause of this was, again, poorly written software. And one time I had a piece of software for a device that would actually write to the wrong location in the registry, and we had to go in there and manually change the location in the registry so that it pointed the right way. This was early in the days of plug and play, but again, we don't really see this kind of thing too often anymore. The other time that you might see this, however, is if a user has gone through their hard drive and they decided to just delete any files that they didn't recognize or they didn't think they could use. So, for example, there might be an executable that they don't think that they need or use and they delete it. Well, that executable has a shortcut that's found in the startup group. And so when they start up their computer and they log on, then it's going to give them the problem that the program was not found. There are also some important informational tools that you can use. One of those is the Task Manager, which I showed you in the last nugget, but there's also the Event Viewer. Let's right-click on my computer to choose Manage. Now, there's a couple of ways of getting here. You can also access this through, let me show you, the Administrative Tools, and then once we're in here, we can just choose Event Viewer, which dedicates, where is it? This console only to the interface, and it doesn't give you any of the rest of this stuff right here. Now this shows you, as it points out here, the application event viewer, the security event viewer, and the system event viewer. And they all will very periodically at times give you red X's or yellow circles with an exclamation point in them. You may also see additional messages in here for office diagnostics or office sessions, or additional things beyond this as well, because certain applications do have the ability to plug into the event viewer here. Also, if you're running on servers, then you'll see additional things such as perhaps DNS events that will also appear. It just depends on what kinds of services that server is running. Now, the usefulness of this is evident because we see here errors. Maybe a user is reporting to me that they are running into certain problems with their computer, and the whole thing just seems to hang, or they have an application that keeps hanging up. Well, if you can look at this application event viewer and look at the error log, we just kind of search for the red X's, of course, and we see that there was an error, an application hang. If I double-click on this, I notice that this was that bad app32 application that I ran, and it tells me the memory addresses and things that took place there, and gives me also additional information down here. Now, by the way, if you cannot identify and decipher what this is saying in bytes, all you have to do is to click on words. And then it all makes sense, right? Well, this is actually information that's designed more for programmers to be able to work with, and it's kind of the natural data size that the computer communicates in, and that's what that information is. Notice there's also this Dr. Watson thing here. This will also tell you some more information about an error message that may have occurred. And so again, this might be useful information to report to an application vendor, for example. So we have application event logs, or in the event viewer, and these are information that relate to specific applications. Then we have security. Now, nothing's showing up right now. What I would have to do in order to get something to show up is to audit a specific folder or a file, for example, or to audit the log on and log off process. And very often in domain computers, this computer is a member of a work group, but in domain computers, there are configured settings where it will show whether someone successfully did or did not log on, or did or did not successfully access a resource. Now, what we would do with this then is it only works with the NTFS file system if we want to monitor whether or not someone accessed a file or a folder. And then we can simply go to the resource. And here I'll just go to a file and kind of illustrate this. We can go to properties, and we're going beyond the scope of the A+ exam objectives, but I do want to show you what this is about at least. Then we would go to advanced, and then we could go to auditing. And from here, we could click add, and we could say, I want to know anytime everyone, any user is successful in reading the folder or reading the data. So I want to know anytime someone is successful or fails in doing those things. And then what I can also do is I have to enable this through something called a local policy. But once I've done those kinds of things, it'll then tell me anytime someone touches that specific file, for example. And then finally, system relates to operating system functions. So for example, I haven't seen this before. This just tells me that. Oh, this is interesting. I have another computer in one of my virtual machines that I started up a while ago that was a Windows 2000 professional machine, and that's just what I named it. And it thinks it's the master browser. This is simply telling me that a master browser election is stopping or an election is being forced. And without going into a lot of detail here, because again, it's not part of the A+ exam objectives, this is simply telling me that one of the computers on my network tries to be the authoritative name source, so that if I try to find another computer by NetBIOS name without a Wins server, then what it does is it checks with that computer to see if it knows of any computers by that name. But the main point here is that, once again, the system will show me various types of information here that will help me potentially to identify any troubleshooting problems. And then I mentioned Windows reporting to you earlier, or various kinds of error reporting. This is something that's really new in recent version of Windows. And the way you configure this is you click on Start, and then right-click my computer to choose Properties, where we've been many times before. And then once we go into the Advanced tab here, we can go into the Error Reporting button down at the bottom. And this says we can enable Windows error reporting for the Windows operating system or programs, and you can also selectively choose different programs. But what this will then do is going to send error messages directly to Microsoft, much like when I started this bad app application earlier. So we'll go ahead and let this error out and give an error. Then we'll see what happens is it's going to go ahead and report an error message to Microsoft. Now, once again, I'll have to close this out, or there it goes, end now. And then what we see happen here is we get that non-responsive program dialog box, and here's where we can tell Microsoft about this problem. Now, Microsoft confides us, or tells us, that this information is confidential and anonymous. So I guess it just depends on how much you're willing to trust Microsoft here. So it's just up to you. I usually send this because I don't usually have a whole lot to hide. I'm not really that protected in a lot of the stuff that I do. So if it's something that I think can help with the cause, I will send the error report. Now, why would I want to do that? Because it might be that other people are also sending the error report about the same application. And maybe we're all having the same problem with Microsoft Word. Every time we try to print something with full color, it gives us a problem and stops responding. Well, if we get a lot of people that are doing that and sending the error report, then Microsoft knows that there's a legitimate problem just by the statistic. And then they can try to see if there's an issue with a specific printer driver or something like that. So if you want to see what the error report contains, you click here, and then it gives you some more information about the problem. And then you can see technical information about the report, and it just identifies some more information here. We can actually also open up the text file to get even more detailed information about it. But otherwise, we can just then click Send Error Report. Microsoft receives it, and that's pretty much it. Of course, we do have to have an internet connection in order to be able to send that information to Microsoft, by the way. And then there's something called msconfig. Now, we did have this in previous versions of Windows, like Windows 98, and I think I even showed it to you a while back here. But we do also have it in Windows XP and Windows XP, that is. We don't have it in Windows 2000. Strangely, it was unavailable in 2000 and then came back in Windows XP. What we have here, though, is if we do msconfig, guess what happens? Nothing. Oh, I guess we don't have it after all, right? Well, we don't run it the same way now. We used to be we could run that from the command line, and if you know where to locate it, you could still do that, but now we run it from within Help and Support Center, which is sometimes also abbreviated just as HSC. And what we do with this is we simply go down here to the Tools under the Tasks. Having clicked on Tools, we then go down here into another item, and let's see if I can find it here. System Configuration Utility. There it is, System Configuration Utility, which is really msconfig. And if I open that utility, that's exactly what it's running. And I can confirm that by Control-Alt-Escape, going to the executable, go to the process. Remember how we use the Windows Task Manager. And there it shows up, plain as day, msconfig. So that's really what this utility is. And I mentioned to you earlier that you can selectively determine what you want to process and what you don't want to process, what services you might want to start up and not start up. Again, if you're trying to use the process of elimination and determine if this item right here is causing my system to hang periodically, well, I could start the computer up without that particular service, for example, and see if that resolves the problem. And we also have startup items. These are items that will appear both in the registry as well as in the startup location or the startup folder over on the start program or the start menu. Now, one of my favorite things that's available with Windows XP is remote desktop and remote assistance. What this allows us to do is to remotely access someone else's desktop or your own desktop. So, for example, maybe I've got a computer right here that we're looking at, and this is my office computer, but I forgot that I left an application running at home and I wanted to close it, or I wanted to get a file or do anything else to my computer at home. Well, I can't just wait till the end of the day. If it's something I want right now, I can still connect to it. And the way I do that is by clicking on Start, and then clicking All Programs, going to Accessories, and then Communications. And then I go here to Remote Desktop Connection and select that link. Then what I will do is to enter in the name of my computer, which in this case is Win64. It's the 64-bit version of Windows XP over there. And then what I want to do is to connect. So they simply click on Connect, and I start to make a connection over to that system. I'll enter in some credentials here. And then the system logs me on, and I'll be able to see what's going on the desktop over on that remote destination computer. And so here I am now. I've connected to the other machine, and I see I had like Yahoo's music engine playing over here. So maybe that was still playing in my speakers, and if I had a young child, maybe it was waking up the baby or something. So I might need to go ahead and close this down so it wouldn't make any more noise. So I just close it, and then I can have total control over everything else, just the same as if I was locally seated at that computer. Then I can also, when I click on Start here, I can log off, which will also log off that machine on that destination computer, or I can disconnect. Now, the difference here is if I disconnect, it leaves that session logged on. And then if I decided to reconnect over a remote desktop again, then it would resume in the exact same place I left it. Any applications that were running, any files that were open, and so forth. Likewise, by disconnecting, if I do go back and physically visit that machine, when I log on then I'll again see whatever was going on the last time I was connected to that machine. At the time I disconnected, those applications and files would be open. So I really do like the remote desktop function for user productivity. Be aware of the fact that it uses the remote desktop protocol, which is a multimedia-oriented protocol, and it makes connections through TCP port 3389, so open up that port on any firewalls that you have between your computer and the destination computer that you want to connect to. It is also a secure connection. It's encrypted, and it's pretty tight. And be aware of the fact that, again, remote desktop is for purposes of productivity, where I'm really the only user involved. I just want to connect to another computer to get things done. The other option there would be remote assistance. With remote assistance, I'm looking for help from another party, like a help desk person or somebody on the internet who I think might help me. We got to be careful about those people on the internet. We know they're all evil, wicked hackers. But as long as they're a trusted party, I might ask for assistance. So you could do that, and you can control that assistance as well if you have a limited scope of trust with that person. Also, you can see everything that they are doing, so that helps to give you a little bit more assurance there as well. Now, how do we do this? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at an example. Here, for example, I've got the blue computer. I'm just calling it blue because of the color of the desktop. And then I have this green computer. The green computer is puzzled about something. They see this yellow thing down in the tray area. They don't know what it is, so they want to ask a friend for help or their help desk for help. So they click on Start, and they say, I need some help and support, and I want someone to connect to my computer with remote assistance to tell me what in the world's going on here. So I want to invite someone to help me, but I don't use Windows Messenger right now, so I can't use that, and I don't have Outlook Express set up. But I can save the invitation as a file. Now, of course, you could use either one of these other two methods if you had them set up. I just don't happen to. So I want to go ahead and save an invitation here, and I'll save it as some helpless user, apparently. So maybe my username here is going to be clueless, okay? So I'll just name something. It could be Joe Smith, Fran Tarkenton, whoever you want it to be. And then you can specify a length of time for that invitation to expire, because you don't want it to be left open indefinitely, because if it's left out there for too long, it could be that somebody would be able to exploit it, and you don't want that to happen. So you can see that you can choose a certain number of days and a certain number of hours or minutes. In fact, in my case, I'll just choose, how about 30 minutes? Let's go with that. Okay. Then I'll go ahead and click on continue, and I can specify a password here as well. So I'll enter in that password, and then I'll save that invitation, and I have to save it in this case to a place where we can both access, both the green computer and the blue computer must have access to the same file share. So I'm going to save it in the trainers directory on their home directory, which is a common location that both of them do have permission to access. And then that's it. It's now been shared. And I can also view the status of my invitation. I see that I have a saved invitation here. The status is open. If I had trouble sending it earlier, for example, if I did send it via email or something, I can also resend it. So in this case, I'll probably be on the phone with the person with the blue computer, and I'm telling them, hey, I can't quite access this thing, this Windows update. I'm not really sure what that is. Can you help me with it? Well, the blue computer user now sees this invitation in this share that we can both access. So the person double clicks on it, and then once they double click on it, they have to enter in the password. Once they enter in that password, then they can go ahead and click on yes to connect to that user's computer. Now, what we have to do here at this point is it starts to make a connection, but notice that it says waiting for an answer. You see, I cannot just connect to that other user's computer without their consent or without their knowledge, because on the green computer where I've just now switched over, it says they're trying to connect. Do you want to allow that person to view your screen and to chat with you? So I would say yes, because I'm looking for help here, and after all, that's what I want to happen. And then we open up a chat window here, and I might say something like, hello, can you help me with the yellow thingy in the tray area? And then send that message. And then over on the blue computer, in their remote assistance window, they can see this message, and I can send a message back saying, yes, please let me take control. And they send that. Then over on the green computer, which is where I am right now, we see that they've received that message, and it calls that person the expert, by the way, to help identify the different parties. And then what I'll try to do is on the blue computer, let me go back to the blue computer, I will say I want to take control. Then on the green computer's machine, they will see this message. Do you wish to let the person take control of your computer? I would click on yes. If I change my mind and if I suspect that they're doing something wrong, I can always press the escape key, and it makes it very clear here on what to do there, and that will prevent them from any longer controlling my computer. But I'll click on yes, and then I'm now sharing that user's computer, and we can click OK there. So now let me go back to where we are, so we can just be clear. I'm on the blue computer. I'm in my remote assistant session right here. And I am now able to connect and control that user's computer here. I can go this to actual size, or I can scale the window if I want to make it so that I can see the whole thing in there. And they were concerned about this updates thing down here. So now I can click on this, and I can tell them, hey, this is what we can do. We can do an express install or a custom install. This might be things that will help to upgrade the capabilities or secure your system better. And then over on their side, let me minimize this and go back to our virtual machine here. They can see everything that I've done. Every time that I, as the expert, move the mouse around, they can see the whole thing, and then I might click on install for them, or I might tell them, if you want to, you can cancel this and do this later. So that should give you an idea of the kind of things that go on with remote assistance. Now, if I decide, oh, wait a minute, I don't like what this person's doing, I hit escape, and then now it has stopped that remote control, and we see that that is exactly the message that has actually popped up. And then to finish the session, I can just click on disconnect, and that's pretty much it. We've now been disconnected, and that's the end of that. Now, over on the green computer over here, we can also then expire that remote assistance request if we want to by going back into help and support. And as we go back into the remote assistance item, I can view the invitation status I can select this, and then I can expire it if have already resolved everything that we needed to do, and I don't need it anymore. Or if I can also just select it and then click on delete. And now that has been deleted. So that's the way that remote assistance works. And again, the purpose of that is to get help from someone else, whereas remote desktop is for productivity so that I can get my own work done. So once again, you can also observe, or that person can allow you to take control if you request it, and you can expire the invitations as I showed you. And then finally, we don't want to forget about a couple of additional items here. Really, this reminder is there as much for me as anything, because we've talked about these two things in the past, but I want to go into a little bit more detail about them. First of all, we just talked about Windows Update and what that is a little bit by way of demonstrating remote assistance. But let's talk about that in a little bit more detail. If I right-click on my computer and choose Properties and then go to Automatic Updates, then we see that things like Windows XP Home computers or Workgroup computers will have the option here for automatic updates where every day it'll check at 3 a.m. or whatever time you specify here, or every frequency that you specify, to see if there are any updates from Microsoft. Now, of course, this is only going to be useful if my computer is actually turned on and connected to the internet at 3 a.m., so you might need to change that. But regardless, what happens then is it will go to Microsoft's website or Microsoft's update site and check to see if there are any service packs or patches or fixes or updates of any kind that are useful for my computer. If it is available, then it can download those, and then it will prompt me with that little item down in the tray area that you saw earlier to see whether or not I want to get that update and install it. Almost always, you should install all of those things because they're useful for increasing stability and, most importantly, security of your system. Now, this works pretty well on an individual basis. In the corporation, this is most likely to be covered with something called Windows Server Update Services or third-party products, something like, there's a product out there called PatchLink, for example, which actually is based here in the Phoenix area. I think it's out in Scottsdale. But regardless, with this, it will be a server that will download all the updates for all of the clients. That way you don't have 1,000 clients all downloading the same update. Instead, you have one server that downloads all the updates, and then it will automatically distribute the updates using something called a group policy objects to each one of my client computers on the corporate network. Now, that's beyond a plus scope, but that just gives you an idea of how it works. That way, for the corporation, we want to administer all of our updates from one central location. I don't want to have to visit each computer to update them all. And it also helps to make sure that all of my computers have the same level of updates, and I have some that have, I don't want to be in the situation where I have some that have Service Pack 1, some that have Service Pack 2, some that have a certain fix and some that don't, and that way I'm not really in a known situation. Well, with the automated corporate methods, everybody's on the same playing field there. And then we also want to take a look at something called scheduled backups. And we might have talked about that briefly in the past, but I just want to go back here to make sure that we're clear on the system tool of the system backup utility where we can schedule a backup. Now what we can do with this and to schedule it is I usually go to advanced mode. So we'll click on advanced mode, and then what we can do is to go to scheduled jobs over here. And then we can just add a job, and then we'll click on next through the wizard. And what we want to do here is you'll just pick whatever data is important to you. I'll just say, selected files or something like this, and then click next. And maybe it's all of the contents of my documents, and then next. Now what I want to do with this is save it to a specific location. I'll just leave that one there that's already selected. I'll go ahead and create that backup. And then we specify what kind of backup we want. We'll just leave it at a normal backup. What I want to get here, however, is that you can verify the data after the backup is complete. You can also use hardware compression if available. That's usually only the case if you have tape backup. I'm using a hard drive for backup, so that doesn't apply. And you can also disable volume shadow copy, which is really a bad idea because by leaving this clear, any files that I have currently open will be able to be backed up. If I check that box, then all documents have to be closed. So that might kind of prevent a full backup from taking place. And then what I can do as I step through this is what I wanted to get to here, is the scheduled backups. I can run the backup later, and I can say run this backup, every Monday. How about that? Since it's already Monday. Run it every Monday, and I can then set the schedule, and I can run it every week at 12 o'clock on Monday. And then when I do that, I can also enter in the credentials, because this will have to run this process even if nobody's logged on. So I'll enter in a username and a password. And now it's going to go ahead and be able to run this whenever I specify. And then I can again specify the account information. Okay, and I guess I got to type in the same password both times, don't I? A little too hasty in my typing there. But in any case, once I've finished all that up, now I can click on Finish, and it's going to back up every Monday. And if I click on through the calendar here, you can see that every Monday there's going to be a backup of that data. If I want to confirm that, I can click on it and double check it. And I can also look at the backup details for whatever it's going to do. And I can look at the properties of it to see a little bit more information, such as more detailed schedule information. Maybe I want every Monday and every Friday. Well, I could change that right here, for example. So very handy way to make sure that a backup happens automatically for my data. That way I don't get into the unenviable situation where I lose some data, but guess what? I have a backup. And then I look at it and I realize that backup was made 6 months ago and it doesn't have any of my current data on there. So that's just another thing to keep in mind. I know that if you want to delete it, you decide you don't need that backup anymore for whatever reason, you simply click it right there on the calendar and then hit the word delete up here. You sure want to delete it? Yes, and now the job is gone. Also, don't forget, when it comes to troubleshooting, you often have to look up resources, and we can't figure all of this stuff out on our own. We might just have to read something that will give us the answer if we would just take the time to do so. Most frequently, that's going to be the manual that comes with whatever the device is or whatever the computer is. And there might be useful information in there that will help us. If you don't have the paper manual, of course, you can always go to the internet to go to the vendor's website, and usually you can download it or get a PDF version of that particular manual. You can also use knowledge-based articles, you can use news groups, things like this on the internet. There's always also continued training that goes on for anybody that's in the technical field. You have to continuously learn about new things, new products, new operating systems, and so forth. And you can also get good resources from the customer themselves. And this, again, goes to the initial interview with the customer where you try to figure out exactly what they were doing and what went wrong. In this nugget, we discussed troubleshooting the operating system, where we started off by looking at various troubleshooting techniques to diagnose common kinds of problems. We saw all different kinds of things that could happen, as well as various types of boot problems and startup problems. Of course, these kinds of problems here could be because of a bad MBR or incorrect files or files that are not found that are necessary to start up the operating system. And sometimes you need a little bit of help in identifying what exactly the problem is. So you might need to get some informational tools there, such as Event Viewer, to see if it's been able to keep a log of the problems that have occurred. And then we also took a look at remote desktop and remote assistance. I love this for being able to remotely connect to a computer for productivity purposes with remote desktop and being able to help somebody else out with remote assistance. We also finally wrapped everything up by taking a look at some common troubleshooting resources that the A+ exam objectives indicate that we need to be aware of. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.